A wide panorama of desert plains covered with a thick layer of snow stretches to the horizon. Night. Everything around is bathed in the pale, grey-blue light of the winter moon, barely breaking through the translucent clouds. Somewhere in the distance, you can hear the wind howling, pulling snow whirlwinds behind it, as if the wild spirits of the prairies had returned to wipe out all life from this land. Against the backdrop of this icy emptiness, a human figure moves barely noticeably. A woman, fragile, wrapped in a tattered coat, covered in frost from head to toe. She walks, barely dragging her feet through the snowdrifts. With every step, she stumbles, as if her legs have long since stopped obeying her. Her breath, short and ragged, dissolves into the blizzard, leaving no trace. Her face is weather-beaten, her lips blue, her eyes full of fatigue and something deeper, extreme loneliness. Underfoot, only the crunch of snow and the crack of ice. No tracks, no landmarks, only endless whiteness and a black sky, twisted by the cold. Every movement is an effort, as if the earth itself is pushing her away, preventing her from going any further. She seems lost, not only in the snow, but in time, in memory, in her own destiny. A gust of wind knocks her off her feet. The woman falls, burying herself in the snow. For a moment she lies motionless. Perhaps she decides she will not get up again. But then, with desperation in every movement, she gets to her knees, breathes heavily, clenches her teeth, and takes another step forward. Somewhere inside her, a faint spark still glows. Hope or memory. Something keeps her on the brink of extinction. The camera slowly zooms in on her face. Her eyes are glazed over with tears that are no longer there. They reflect pain, betrayal, and an unbearable sense of loss. She whispers a name, silently. It cannot be heard over the wind, but it pierces the viewer more quietly than any scream. A name that brings with it a flash of memory, light, and warmth. And with this flash, the storm recedes, at least for a moment. A soft transition, as if the film is being rewound. Another landscape appears before Louise's eyes. The streets of a small town covered with fresh snow, with the sound of bells ringing. The houses are lit by lanterns. Smoke rises from the chimneys. The air is filled with the smell of fresh bread and pine needles. People laugh, children run and throw snowballs. This is Red Valley, a place where everything once seemed simple. Flashbacks follow one after another, her hands holding a mug of hot chocolate, steam rising to her face, Sam's face leaning toward her. He says something, and she smiles in response. The flames of the fireplace are reflected in his eyes. He promises that everything will be fine, that he will always be there. Sam always knew how to speak beautifully. She remembers how that evening he placed his hand on her stomach and whispered, not knowing if anyone could hear him, "I won't let you get hurt, neither you nor him." Words that were so warm then now sound like a mockery. The memory fades as suddenly as it flared up. The blizzard returns, the cold cutting into her skin. Louise is alone again, back in the present. Her hands are shaking, her lips whispering something she can no longer hear. She walks forward, not knowing where, guided only by the memory, like a mirage, of a life that no longer exists. And somewhere behind this wall of snow lies what she must find, or the one who will find her, if fate allows. From the icy darkness of the blizzard, from the endless void into which Louise is disappearing, her mind clings to the only thing that can still warm her: memory. It comes not as a thought, but as a feeling, like the scent of pine needles, like the warmth of palms on her cheek, like a sound that has long since faded away, but which her body still remembers. The picture changes. Softly, almost imperceptibly. The sound of the wind fades into the background. Instead, there is the quiet ringing of bells, laughter, the clatter of horses' hooves coming from the streets. Large snowflakes slowly swirl in the air, but here, in this town, winter is not hostile. It is like a festive costume. Red Valley, Wyoming Territory, 1872. The sign sways above the entrance to the town, where every house seems to breathe warmth. Golden light pours from the windows, and Christmas carols ring out in the air. Everything here is filled with anticipation. Happiness is still possible here. Life goes on in the streets. Market women leisurely lay out apples on their stalls. A blacksmith laughs at someone else's joke. Boys excitedly slide down a snow-covered hill. But in one house, where the door is slightly ajar, another story unfolds. A story that now seems like a dream. Inside, a fire crackles in the fireplace. Louise sits on a low chair, and Sam sits opposite her. His hand holds hers gently and confidently, his gaze full of hope, determination, and love. He talks about the future, about how everything will change, about the land and the house that will be theirs, about peace away from the hustle and bustle. He promises a new spring and a new life. Louise looks at him as if she sees the center of her world. She smiles, lowering her eyes slightly. At that moment, she believes, with all her heart, without reservation. In every word Sam says, she feels their shared path in every gesture of his, the confidence that together they can do anything. He speaks beautifully, but most importantly, he is there. And that means everything else ceases to matter. After dinner, they sat in silence for a long time, listening to the wood crackling in the fireplace. Outside the windows, the city continued to live its unhurried life. Somewhere, a sleigh creaked and someone shouted. Louise felt as if the whole world had held its breath, giving them this moment, without fuss, without fear. She got up and went to the window. A thin layer of frost had formed patterns on the glass. She traced them with her finger, drawing a semicircle, and in that silence, she suddenly heard Sam come up behind her and hug her. His hand rested on her stomach, gently but confidently. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. That gesture said it all. That evening, by the fireplace, they made plans. He talked about the river along which he wanted to build a house, about the horses they would breed, about the silence he so longed for after many years of wandering. He dreamed aloud, confidently, as if it had already happened, and she absorbed every word. She dreamed, too. Not about the house and the river, no, about him being there for her, no matter what, about holding his hand. That was the present that would last forever. She didn't notice how Sam's confidence became her own. And when everything changed, she wasn't ready. Lying in the snow, she still whispers his name, like a spell, like a plea, like a reproach. The snow covers her face again. Louise's eyes are barely open. The wind howls, filling the silence that neither the fireplace nor memories can save. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond this storm, something is still breathing, something wild, something alive. After that night, when I was left alone in the snow, betrayed, exhausted, the memory of the day when it all began came back to me. It returned slowly, as if being scraped out from the depths of the frost. I remember how we left. We left the city at dawn. The world was quiet, as if waiting for us to disappear behind the hill. I sat in the saddle, wrapped tightly in a fur shawl, and he rode beside me. Sam. His face was tense, like a man who hadn't slept for 2 days. He kept looking back at the clouds, then back again, to where civilization and the people who, as he said, were not our friends remained. The prairie was empty, silent. The wind blowing among the hills seemed gentle until it began to take our breath away. The sun was low, bright, but gave off no warmth. I looked ahead and imagined how the grass would turn green here in the spring, how we would plant flowers, how there would be a table on the porch with my homemade bread on it. A light still burned in my heart. Sam hardly spoke. His silence was not what I was used to, not calm, not thoughtful. It was closed off. There was no place in it for me or for spring, only for the wind and the maps, which he stared at again and again, as if they were not words but a sentence. I felt the cold gathering between us, not from the weather, from within. Sometimes I caught myself reaching out to him mentally, like a child about to get lost in a crowd, but I pushed those thoughts away. We're together. We're close. We're building something new. He was just tired. He just hadn't slept. Just... I didn't want to admit what was already on the surface. Sometimes the truth is like ice. It seems solid until you fall into the icy water. I thought that if I talked about home, about plans, about the future, he would melt. Everything would be fine. But a shadow had already fallen between us. I saw it. I felt it chilling my back. All this time, I was riding next to him, as if next to a dream from which you don't want to wake up. And yet, deep in my heart, I knew that in this dream, someone would inevitably disappear first. Evening fell quickly, enveloping the forest in a strip of darkness and the whisper of branches. We set up camp at the edge of the forest, where the pines stood like guards, silently watching the deserted prairie. Snow fell quietly from the branches, and even the wind died down, as if respecting the silence that hung between us. The bonfire flickered, casting dancing shadows on our faces and barely illuminating the space around us. I was tired, my legs were shaking, but not from the cold, more from inattention. Sam was nearby, but I could feel a distance between us, as if an invisible wall had been erected between us. He helped me lie down, gently covered me with fur, trying to warm me up. His movements were careful, slightly slowed down, as if he was saying goodbye but didn't dare to say it out loud. He touched my forehead with a kiss without looking me in the eyes. The camera seemed to freeze on his face, showing the struggle that raged in his soul, between duty and fear, between love and necessity. I stared at the fire, my thoughts shattering into 1,000 tiny pieces. His gaze, filled with doubt, seemed to foreshadow the end of something important, but I couldn't understand, or didn't want to understand, what exactly he was saying goodbye to. Silence spread around me, enveloping me in coldness and loneliness. I felt hope slowly slipping away, leaving behind a void that neither fire nor words could warm. And then, in that twilight, I felt for the first time that he was leaving. But I was too blind to see it then. The morning dawned cold and lifeless. I woke up to the cold snow barely touching my face, and the fire had long since died down, leaving only grey embers. All around was silence, emptiness. The forests and prairies seemed to hold their breath, waiting for something terrible. The first thing I noticed was that the horses were gone. Not a single one, neither near nor far. There was only the wind, rustling through the dry branches and stirring uneasily in my heart. In the saddle where we had held each other yesterday lay a bundle, a letter. The paper was slightly cracked from the cold, but the words were clear, like a verdict. I struggled to unfold the letter. An inner voice seemed to utter those lines, even though I didn't hear them aloud. You are strong. I'm sorry. This is the only way. Suddenly, my whole world collapsed. My eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't cry right away. My heart was constricted with shock and incomprehension. I wanted to scream, call his name, ask for an explanation, but only emptiness echoed back at me. I walked around the camp, every movement seeming meaningless, like walking on an icy ocean that was about to crack under my feet. The letter slipped through my fingers again and again, as if trying to hold on to the last threads of hope that had already been broken. At that moment, the storm that had been rumbling on the horizon seemed to descend closer, making me shiver not only from the cold, but also from the horror of being lost. The world I had built in my mind collapsed. Only one thought remained. I must survive. For myself. For who I was before all this betrayal. Morning turned to day, but the cold did not recede. The camp seemed dead, as if the earth itself had held its breath. Inside me, the realization grew that staying here meant waiting for death. It would be slow, painful, without hope. I knew that now, as clear as the frozen sky above my head. Gathering everything that might be useful, a few blankets, some provisions, what was left of our journey, I got up and went out into the emptiness. The white canvas of the plain stretched out before me, endless and cold. I walked blindly, guided only by the faint light that filtered through the low clouds. The wind blew so hard that it tore my fur scarf off and pulled my clothes off my shoulders. The snow turned into a blizzard, a blinding wall that prevented me from seeing a step ahead. There was no road, only a howling, relentless blizzard. I screamed, calling for Sam. I called as if his voice could break through this white emptiness. But in response, I heard only the howling wind, which squeezed my heart and bound my legs. Every attempt to find tracks was futile. The wind erased them instantly, as if it wanted to forget me here forever. The camera zooms out, showing my small, dark figure lost in the endless white sea. I am like a ghost, lost between life and death. Old Louise was gone. The one who believed, loved, and made plans died here, crushed by the storm and betrayal. A heavy, quiet voice off-screen says, "So I was left alone, where no one was supposed to survive." The early morning brought not relief, but a new battle. Louise made her way through the snow-covered prairie, where every step sank into deep, cold snow. The white blanket stretched to the horizon like a merciless ocean of ice and emptiness. The frost bit her face, tightening her skin, and each breath escaped as a cloud of steam that quickly dissolved into the air. The wind was relentless, piercing even the warmest clothes. She felt threatened by every rustle, every movement of the branches and snowflakes. Suddenly, at the edge of her vision, a shadow flashed. Several wolves gliding across the white field, their eyes burning with greedy gleams. They watched cautiously from a distance, preparing for the decisive move. Louise stopped, her heart pounding, fear pulling her down, but her memory filled her with light. Her thoughts returned to the house where it all began, to the warm hearth, her parents' care, their voices that sounded like a promise of protection. She remembered how her mother talked about strength of spirit, about how even in the most difficult moments, one must not give up. The wolves drew closer, their footsteps becoming clearer, their cold eyes now very close. But Louise was no longer the girl who would break at the first test. She took a deep breath and clenched her fists, as if gathering all the strength her family had left her. She decided to fight, for her life, for the truth, for her right to exist. The blizzard intensified, but in this ruthless world she found an inner fire that would not be extinguished. The day was drawing to a close, but the sky showed no sign of light. The clouds were thickening, and the wind was increasingly knocking people off their feet with snow whirlwinds. Louise went deeper into the forest. The sparse bushes, hidden under a layer of snow, seemed to be the last refuge from the approaching storm. She was looking for protection, even if only temporary, to catch her breath and gather her strength. But nature here was treacherous. Traps were hidden under the snow cover, deep, soft drifts that you could fall into without noticing. She had barely taken a step when the ground gave way beneath her feet. As she fell, she was overcome by the cold, the snow penetrating her clothes, taking her breath away and stealing her warmth. Panic burned in her heart, the cold stiffened her muscles, and despair gathered like a dark cloud above her head. It seemed as if the earth itself was trying to swallow her, to plunge her into oblivion. She thrashed about, struggling in the trap, fighting not only the circumstances, but also her own fear that this was the end. In those moments, her mind flashed back memories, fragments of the past, like frames from an old film, her parents' house, her mother's warm hands, which first taught her courage, loss, loneliness, the first harsh trials, when as a child she learned to survive, when fate was cruel but did not break her. Summoning her last ounce of strength, Louise broke free from the snow trap. She crawled to the surface, breathing heavily, her clothes soaked with snow and moisture, her fingers already beginning to lose sensation. Her body felt like flesh and ice, tired and exhausted. Nevertheless, with every breath she took, she repeated to herself that she had to keep going. Ahead lay a blizzard, uncertainty, and salvation, or death. But she couldn't give up. She got to her feet and continued on her way, each step causing her pain, but her eyes burned with an unyielding fire. Evening descended on the plain, painting the snow in cold shades of grey and blue. The air was filled with icy calm, but for Louise it brought only heaviness and pain. Her fingers had long since gone numb, as if covered with a thick layer of ice. Every movement brought sharp stabs of pain. Her legs, heavy with cold and fatigue, barely obeyed her, like capricious branches in the frost. Her faithful companion, the horse that had been an integral part of the journey until then, suddenly gave up. It fell into the snow, rolling over helplessly, breathing intermittently, its eyes dull. Looking at it, Louise felt something break inside her, not just the loss of an animal, but a symbol of complete loneliness and hopelessness. She tried to help. She stroked the horse's neck, tried to give it water from her hands, but she understood that her strength was running out, and she would have to continue without it. The weight of this realization was merciless. Every minute without the animal's support was a step toward death. Memories from her childhood came to mind. How her parents taught her resilience, how they said that true strength lies not in the body, but in the heart and spirit. These words sounded especially loud now, as if reminding her that even in hopelessness one can find a spark to light a new path. But this evening was difficult. The silence of the plain, broken only by the whistling of the wind, became a reflection of her inner emptiness. Louise felt her strength slowly leaving her, despair becoming denser and thicker, like a heavy blanket that was impossible to shake off. She sank down onto the snow, her eyes closing for a moment. But even there, in the depths of darkness and pain, where it seemed that everything was over, where every breath was difficult, a light flashed in her soul, faint but alive, a light of hope that made her get up and continue on her way. Night fell on the deserted clearing below the slope, enveloping the world in a thick blanket of darkness and cold. Louise was already at her limit. Every movement was agonizingly difficult, and her breathing was rare and intermittent. Suddenly, her legs gave way, and her body collapsed into the snow, cold, prickly, but now seeming like the last refuge. Her consciousness began to slowly dissolve, like thin ice under the weight of the winter sun. Her thoughts became confused, fragments flashing by. The faces of her parents from childhood, her warm home, laughter that now seemed so distant, almost unreal. The memories of the last few days, anxiety, betrayal, loneliness and struggle, all mixed up in a dark whirlpool, carrying her deeper into the abyss. The emptiness around her became absolute. No sound, no light, only endless cold and darkness in which she was alone. In this moment of complete loneliness, it seemed that everything was over, that life was leaving forever, dissolving into a lifeless void. But even in this abyss, in the very darkness, where not a drop of strength remained, where the soul seemed abandoned, a quiet voice was born inside, a voice that reminded that one can only survive by going through this darkness, that there are powers hidden deep inside, and it is through pain, fear, and despair that true strength is born. Her body froze in the snow, and her consciousness stood on the edge, ready to either leave or find the strength to rise again. This moment became a symbol of choice, between the end of the path and a new beginning, between death and the struggle for life. Night had blanketed the world in white as the blizzard lashed out across the wasteland with renewed vigor. Whirling snow swirled and tore like evil magic, robbing one of all sense of direction and hope. On the cold ground, almost buried under ice and snow, lay Louise, unconscious, her body gripped by an unyielding cold, her breath barely perceptible. In this sea of cold and silence, it seemed as if death had already touched her. And suddenly, in the impenetrable whiteness, a figure appeared, slender, tall, and confident, like the spirit of the prairie itself. He walked lightly and silently, despite the fierce storm. His clothes were made of rough but warm deerskin, decorated with ancient symbols that spoke of a deep connection with the land and the spirits of his ancestors. He held a bow in his hands, a tomahawk next to him, and his face was hidden under a hood with patterns and feathers, symbols of a warrior and a guardian. The man carefully lowered himself to Louise. His eyes, dark and piercing, studied her carefully, seeing in her not just a lost soul, but someone who could still fight. He gently but firmly lifted her body, pressing her to himself like a weak fire in the bitter cold. His movements were full of respect and determination, as if he knew that her life was now in his hands. The contrast between the wild, merciless nature and the care of this stranger created a magical atmosphere. Here, among the snow and wind, hope was born. He was not just saving a person, he was awakening in her a spark of life that was to become the beginning of a new path. The winter night slowly gave way to the first pale light of the morning, but the blizzard still did not want to subside. In the depths of a mountain gorge, a small hut was hidden, a solid but simple house made of rough boards and stones, surrounded by snowdrifts and black silhouettes of coniferous trees. The wind, unable to get inside, only rustled quietly behind the walls, creating a feeling of comfort and safety. A man in patchy clothing carefully stepped over the threshold, holding an almost lifeless Louise in his arms. His movements were calm, as if this house was not just a shelter, but a temple of life and hope. Having laid her down by the fire, he carefully examined the victim. Her skin was pale, her lips were bluish, her body was shaking from frostbite and fatigue. Without a word, he removed her wet, icy clothes, replacing them with warm skins. The flames of the fireplace gently cast dancing shadows on the walls, filling the space with a soft golden light. The silence of the shelter was filled with the breath of life and the mystery of nature, the crackling of the wood, the whisper of the wind outside the window, the muffled sounds of the night dwellers. In this sanctuary of time and space, everything seemed slow, filled with meaning and deep calm. Louise was on the edge of consciousness, drowsiness and weakness intertwined with a shaky sense of security. An inner voice, like a distant echo, awakened warm and strange feelings, a mixture of fear, vulnerability, and trust. She did not understand who this man was and why he saved her from the White Death, but at that moment she wanted to believe that life had not yet left her. The first light of the morning broke through the cracks in the walls of the hut, playing on the rough-cut wooden surfaces. Inside, there was silence, filled only with a light whisper of the wind and the soft crackle of smouldering coals in the hearth. The Apache warrior, his face both stern and calm, was absorbed in his work, turning ancient herbs from the mountain slopes and valleys into healing tinctures and ointments. He carefully rubbed the leaves and bark, inhaling the scent of the wild, as if each vial contained the power of the ancestors. His hands moved confidently, as if each touch were a prayer, each gesture a connection with the spirits of the land. Smoke from the brazier lazily flowed toward the ceiling, filling the space with the tart scent of pine and herbs, creating an invisible aura of protection and purification. The focus was on Louise. Her face was still pale, her skin cracked from the cold, her fingers were numb. Gradually, as if coming to life from a dream, she began to regain consciousness. Eyes open to the world, but instead of fear, curiosity and gratitude awakened in them. A strange, tender feeling that arises between the saved and the savior. The man watched her reaction with quiet respect. His gaze was filled with the wisdom of generations who knew the value of life and death, strength and weakness. In that moment, their fates intertwined. The story of one salvation became the story of rebirth. An unspoken agreement hung in the air, a trust that had yet to be strengthened, but which had already begun with a simple touch of a hand and a sincere look. Awakening was slow and painful. Her body trembled with weakness. Her consciousness seemed to be breaking through a thick veil of fog. Around her, the dim light of the fire, which flickered and cast wavering shadows on the wooden walls of the hut. Everything was alien and mysterious. The face next to her, new, unusual, framed in feathers and leather decorations, which at first inspired alarm and fear. His gaze was calm, almost gentle, but panic was rising in her mind. Who was he? Why was she here? Why was she dependent on a stranger in a wild land where the rules and laws were completely different? She tried to move away, to look away, to recoil, but weakness paralyzed her body. The man made no sudden movements, only cautiously extended his hand to her with a simple treat: dried meat, the familiar smell of the wild. His gestures were calm, almost careful, as if he wanted to convey peace and protection through them. A struggle unfolded inside Louise between the instinct for self-preservation and a growing sense of trust, unclear and timid. She realized that her fear was fueled not only by the unfamiliar environment, but also by the deep-seated prejudices that permeated life in a town far from the wild nature and alien cultures. Images and words learned since childhood popped into her head. Who are the savages? Who are the strangers? And how dangerous can be the world outside the usual way of life? But at that moment, when the body was still too weak to fight, and the mind was trying to find support, a quiet understanding appeared. This man, despite all the differences, saved her life, and it was this understanding that became the first spark that could ignite trust in order to find not only survival, but also hope in this harsh world. The day in the hut passed in silence, filled with observation and careful study. Louise was slowly drawn into a new world where every movement had meaning and every gesture important knowledge. The man, without saying a word, showed her the intricacies of life in the mountains and the desert. His hands deftly lit a fire, turning wood and tinder into a living flame, a symbol of warmth and survival. He carved simple tools from wood, deftly handling stone and leather, demonstrating a deep understanding of the surrounding nature. Louise absorbed everything like a sponge, from the sound of the crackling firewood to the faint scent of the medicinal herbs that lay nearby. In this silent exchange, something more than mere survival emerged. Here, in this small shelter, she began to feel respect for a world that had previously seemed wild and incomprehensible to her. Despite the complete absence of words, the man radiated calm and confidence, qualities that spoke of his inner strength. He did not demand explanations, did not rush. His actions were a form of dialogue, simple and understandable without words. Louise understood that sometimes silence can be stronger than 1,000 speeches. A new feeling grew inside her, an interest in this culture, in his way of life, which she had previously been unable to understand or accept. Overcoming old stereotypes became a step not only towards survival, but also towards inner growth, the discovery of a new self. The day unfolded into a living lesson in nature and survival. Louise followed the man into the surrounding forest, where he demonstrated the ancient ways of making fire with quiet confidence. His hands deftly rubbed a stick against the wood until a faint smoke appeared. Then he demonstrated how to use flint and steel, sparks falling onto the dried wood. Louise watched carefully, then tried it herself. Each failure was followed by another attempt, and the tenacity in her eyes grew. Next, he led her to the braided branches, where he showed her how to set traps for small game. Dexterity, precision, and patience were the keys to success. He demonstrated each move, allowing Louise to imitate him, as if passing on knowledge without words. And then, when at last the flames flared, gently illuminating their faces, the reflection of the fire on Louise's face showed a flash of new strength, a quiet but unwavering hope that she could overcome whatever lay ahead. This day was not just a lesson in technique, but a symbol of rebirth, the awakening of an inner fire that burned deep within her and was ready to light the way in the darkest times. The days dragged on slowly, but filled with new life. Louise gradually regained her strength, each morning greeting the awakening of the forest along with the dawn. She learned to run along frost-covered paths, feeling how the frost revives every cell of her body. Her hands confidently lit a fire, and the sounds of crackling wood became familiar and comforting to her. Cooking became a ritual for her. Every little thing, from choosing roots and berries to carefully tending the fire, filled her heart with peace and confidence. Her soul gradually found harmony with nature, and her body, strength and endurance. Help, when she received it from a man, ceased to seem a burden. Rather, support, given without words and conditions. And Louise herself not only accepted, but also returned the care, with small gestures and smiles that appeared more and more often on her face. Something new arose between them: trust, respect, that did not require explanation. In the silence of their communication, a warm connection arose, cemented by glances and common efforts. Louise's inner voice rustled with thoughts about the beginning of a new life, not just survival, but rebirth, respect for herself and the world around her. She knew that trials awaited her ahead, but now a fire burned inside that would not let her fall. The days spent in the mountains gave Louise something more than just survival: a new sense of strength and peace, a deep connection with nature and the mysterious man who saved her life. But suddenly, the silence was broken. Far away, across the hills and slopes, an alarming roar of horses and sharp shots rushed like thunder breaking the peace. Louise perked up, feeling a cold knot of anxiety in her stomach. Tahoe, accustomed to such sounds and dangers, instantly tensed, his eyes keenly watching the horizon. Silhouettes of riders appeared against the clear blue sky, a lumbering group racing through the snowy clearings. A familiar figure was among them: Sam, the man whose promises and betrayals had left a deep mark on Louise. He looked determined and confident, trying to convey the idea that he had been looking for her all this time. His voice was firm, and his gaze was full of determination and, as it were, care. But Louise's heart was a mixture of conflicting feelings. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of joy lit up, perhaps hope that this man really was looking for her. But she could not forget the darkness lurking behind those words. Suspicion, coldness, and caution grew, filling her every breath. Tahoe stood next to her, silent, but his wary gaze spoke louder than words. He knew this meeting was dangerous. He did not trust any movement of the riders, did not take their presence as a good omen. The scene seemed filled with unspoken tension, a precarious line between the past that was trying to bring Louise back and the new beginning she was just beginning to build. Late afternoon was falling on the mountains, softly painting the landscape in golden pink hues, but in the shelter there was a tension that could not be dissolved even by this warm light. Sam stood next to Louise, trying to project confidence and sincerity, as if trying to convince not only her but himself of the truth of his words. He spoke calmly, explaining his quest and his supposedly boundless concern, but with every movement and look, he made Louise doubt more and more. Tahoe, silent and impenetrable, watched Sam carefully. His gaze was heavy and filled with mistrust. He did not take a single unnecessary step, only quietly assessing the situation, as if he had a premonition that all this was far from as simple as the stranger was trying to make it seem. Louise's inner voice responded loudly to the small inconsistencies in Sam's words, changes in tone, hidden pauses, digressions from the main topic. She felt an internal barrier that seemed to grow between them by itself, separating her from the man she once loved. Along with it, the realization grew. He was not who he seemed, and his intentions were much more complex and darker than she could have imagined. The atmosphere thickened, like the air before a storm. The silence became louder than words, and every look, every movement reminded them of the fragile line on which all three stood. At that moment it became clear: the past does not let go, and it is ready to tear everything apart again. The evening sky slowly thickened. The thin light went behind the mountain peaks, leaving only the flickering fire around which the three gathered. Louise stood between two worlds, past and present, between two men, two destinies. In this secluded shelter, the mountains seemed to be a destroyer of worries, but inside her a storm raged, which neither silence nor cold could calm. Her thoughts rushed about like a flame, torn between fear and hope. Memories of the past, of Sam, of the life she once knew, surfaced with painful clarity. His voice, promises, moments that seemed bright, but now cast shadows of doubt and deceit. At the same time, the presence of Tahoe, its silent strength, its calm, which are like a bridge to a new life, to something real and sincere. Her heart demanded freedom, purity, and truth, and her mind caution and protection. She felt determination growing in her, overcoming fears and doubts, slowly but inevitably. The wind outside the window whispered stories of change, of a path that requires courage. And at that moment, Louise made a choice to stay, to step towards the unknown and start anew, with the one who taught her to fight, who became for her not just salvation, but support. A look full of inner strength rushed into the darkness of the night, where there was no longer a place for old fears. The darkness of the night covered the shelter with a thick blanket. Only rare flashes of lightning and the roar of a thunderstorm cut through the gloom, foreshadowing a storm not only outside the windows, but also inside. The calm seemed deceptive, a taut web ready to break at any moment. Louise, still warmed by the determination to make a choice, barely had time to feel the anxious tension spreading around her. Sam appeared suddenly, like a shadow from the past, breaking the boundaries of security that she had built for so long. His eyes burned with a furious will, unyielding to respect for her freedom. He tried to tear her away from her new world by force, breaking against the foundations that she had built within herself. Tahoe, silent and strong, stood between them, like a living barrier, protecting not only Louise's body, but also her soul. His determination was firm and unyielding, like the stone cliffs around their shelter. In an instant, a struggle arose, not only physical, but also symbolic. A struggle for the right to choose her destiny, for the right to a new life without fear and coercion. The sounds of the struggle merged with the roar of the thunderstorm and the whistle of the wind, creating a chorus of danger and hope. At that hour, Louise felt stronger than ever, realizing that her choice was not just words, but a living, pulsating right to be herself. When the storm died down, only silence and confidence remained in the place of conflict. Tahoe guarded her peace, confirming that they were now connected not only by circumstances, but also by mutual respect and trust. The night became a symbol of transition, from fear to freedom, from the past to the future. The night covered the mountains with dense darkness. The cold air squeezed the lungs, and the flames of the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls of the hut. Inside, the air seemed even heavier. Tension hung in every look, in every gesture. Sam, like a storm, did not calm down. His determination became more tangible than ever. He was not going to give in. His will went straight ahead, challenging the calm of Tahoe. The men stood opposite each other, motionless, like warriors before a battle. Their gazes, cold and piercing, seemed to clash in a silent war, where every move could be the last. Louise stood between them, her body tense, her heart beating louder than the fire, the flames of which were reflected in her eyes. She felt the thunderous charge in the air growing, a harbinger of the inevitable explosion. Sam approached, his footsteps echoing heavily. Tahoe did not retreat, remained motionless, ready for any development. At this moment, words lost their meaning. Everything was decided not by speeches, but by strength, will, fortitude. Louise understood that the conflict had already gone beyond her control. She was only a witness, but at the same time a participant, on the verge of intervention. Slowly, the tension turned to movement, quick, sharp gestures that held back rage. Tahoe and Sam began to fight without words, each blow reflecting years of struggle and hurt. Louise watched the world around her disintegrate in the flames of conflict, feeling both fear and determination. Fear for the outcome and determination not to let the past destroy everything. Wind whistled between the rocks, howling through the icy branches, and the snow swirled, almost obscuring the shapes on the slope. Tahoe and Sam clashed in a brutal duel, every second filled with tension and pain. Their bodies moved quickly, like wild animals, throwing themselves at each other in a mad struggle for control and power. Blows echoed across the rocks, breathing raggedly, breath turning to steam, mixing with the cold air. Tahoe moved with confidence, each attack calculated, each defensive maneuver precise and powerful. Sam was brutal and merciless, desperate to turn the tide of the fight, but his movements were increasingly chaotic due to fatigue and pain. Louise stood to the side, her heart pounding so loudly that it seemed even the mountains could hear. As Sam raised his hand for the final blow, she rushed forward, standing between them, blocking the way. This was the turning point. The rage was contained, the violence stopped. Sam, amazed by her determination, slowed down, and soon the strength left him. He fell to his knees, breathing hard, pain piercing every cell in his body. Unable to continue, he turned away, hiding in shame and humiliation in the night and snowstorm. Tahoe, though victorious, felt the weight of every blow, every loss. The victory was bitter. It cost a lot of effort and left deep scars. The wind continued to howl, the snow fell in a smooth blanket on the ground, and Louise looked at the two men standing on opposite sides of fate. This night had changed everything. The choice had been made, but the price was yet to come. Dawn crept slowly through the mountain peaks, painting the sky in soft pink and gold hues. The air was fresh and cool, filled with the quiet promise of a new beginning. Louise stood at the edge of the shelter, feeling the past dissolve behind her, giving way to the decision that she would choose in favor of the present and the future. Tahoe stood quietly nearby, silent and reliable, his face etched with lines of endurance and wisdom. There were no words between them, but a deep understanding, a respect built on trials and support. In this silence, a new strength was born, trust, without which there could be no true freedom. They slowly gathered their modest things, carefully placing them in bags and skins. Each gesture was filled with intent and calm, a sign that the decision had been made and it was impossible to turn back. The mountain paths called them forward, to the unknown, but with the feeling that now they were walking together. Their silhouettes slowly dissolved in the morning mist, merging with the harsh beauty of the mountains. The path forward was long and unknown, but in Louise's heart there was hope. Hope for freedom, for a new life, where she herself would become the master of her own destiny. Louise sits by the fire, dressed in traditional Apache clothes, as if she had become a part of this world. Her movements are calm and measured, each gesture filled with strength and confidence, gained through hardship and trials. Her gaze is warm but penetrating, reflecting inner harmony and a deep understanding of life. The years of struggle are behind her. Now she is a woman with roots and support, living in a world that once seemed alien and hostile to her. Louise quietly tells the children around the fire. Her voice is soft and soulful, filled with deep calm. The story of how the storm in her life became not only a test, but also a path to herself. Every snowstorm, every fall, and every awakening are all part of the journey leading to inner growth and awareness of one's own strength. Her words carry hope and wisdom, as if inviting listeners to see in their difficulties an opportunity for transformation. The fire crackles quietly around her, reflecting the warmth and light born not only from the flames, but also from life's experiences. Tahoe stands nearby, calmly watching Louise and the children. A quiet, reserved smile lights up his face, a reflection of the inner peace he has found after all his trials. In this silent unity, there is a connection between two destinies, two cultures that have found a common language through trust and respect. Their joint presence around the fire seems to symbolize a new beginning, a harmony where the past and the future are intertwined in one continuous flow. The evening sky above them softly darkens, and their silhouettes merge with the surrounding nature, promising light and hope ahead. The silhouettes of Louise and Tahoe slowly dissolve in the golden light of the setting sun. Warm light envelops them, as if emphasizing the end of a long journey, a journey full of trials and transformations. The evening mist gently embraces the mountains where they began a new life, free from fear and doubt. This last image is a symbol of hope and eternal renewal, an invitation to look forward to the future they have chosen together. Their union sounds the promise of harmony, strength, and peace. Thank you for being with us on this journey. Together we went through the storm and found the light within ourselves. If Louise's story touched you, support her with a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new exciting stories. Until next time, friends, may your path be bright and full of strength.